Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Diatone Roma F35. Jumping right into the flight. This is on a 6S 550 milliamp G&B battery. We'll get back to all the specs and stuff back at the desk. I thought in this particular situation we should jump right into the flight. And on those punch outs, listen to the props. Something is going on. I've heard this before and I think I've mentioned it in other reviews, that it's almost as though when you get to the apex and you throttle down to 0, that the motor braking is on, but it's not. Again, I've heard this a couple other times, but I also noticed when that happens, I don't get as much throw as I expect. And throw is what I think the advantage of this combination of having these really big motors on a 3.5 inch prop running a 6S battery. You know, you're going to have more weight. So as you throw the quad, you know, you go from high throttle to no throttle over something, that it will carry a lot more, and that would bode itself well to a smooth, cruisy sort of freestyle sort of flight, which is a little bit outside of my forte. Also, I whack a number of the greenery, the bushes, the trees, and stuff like that. Whoa, over-rotated, as I said when I was actually flying it, and I just tear right through it. This thing has got so much beef and weight behind it, so much sand in its pants, that it just rips right through that stuff. And being a micro guy, I'm definitely not used to that. This particular flight won't be the whole flight, but we will get to see just about 95% of the battery, I would say, on this 550 milliamp 4S. I did fly it on 850 and a 1050, all 6S batteries. Actually acquired some additional 6S batteries in order to be able to fly and test this thing out. I think one of the other advantages it might have is for longer flight time, especially if you're someone who likes to do exploratory flight. It's not going to have the efficiency that like a 4-inch long range would, but a more traditional quad with all sorts of grunt and power, but it also has some pretty good long flight time, especially if you fly it on a battery such as the 1050. I think I got over 6 minutes of flight on the 1050. So pretty good balance there between long flight time and then having a smooth cruiser, not a cruiser, but you know, a smooth, flowy sort of freestyle sort of quad due to its weight and power. Hopefully the neighborhood noise, the bug noise, the various things we have going on doesn't bother us too much. I know that it's one of those things that living in my area, there's lots of bugs this time of year. And they get worse as it gets later in the day. So if I fly at like from 10 a.m. to about 2:30 p.m. is kind of the sweet spot to keep the bug noise down. But that's also the sweet spot for all the other neighborhood noise, whether it is on the weekend and kids out playing or people doing lawn work, mowing, cutting tree limbs, brush down. You know, just living in a neighborhood, you got to put up with everything.
Well, geez, oh Pete.
It's not supposed to be like that. But that wasn't the only crash. There was also this one.
Wow, I don't know what happened there.
And there were other crashes as well. One of the things that set me back a little bit in the review, I had to wait for additional batteries. I had the 550 6S batteries, but I wanted to get some in the recommended size, the 850, and I went ahead and bought a couple of 1050 batteries. But I worked with Diatone, and because I was experiencing what looked like a little bit of desync, so we started going through and checking some of the settings, and we found that the demag compensation was set wrong. So after I fixed that, it flew normally, and the motor temperature came way back down. Matter of fact, they're dead cool. But you know, I had a number of crashes. Some of them you might see as relatively minor. You know, where I'm 5 to 9 feet off the ground, and then you get kind of that desync activity where it just kind of spins to the ground. But there were a few other crashes, but that last one, while there wasn't a lot of speed behind it, I'm worried that that second crash I showed you where I came in and the battery became disconnected, and that was my fault. Then it just kind of hit the ground. I don't know how high it was. It wasn't a true dive. I was pulling out of the dive when it did hit. But, you know, so we had all these different impacts, and I'm just not sure that last one or the first one I showed you where this actually broke was the complete culprit. But you need to see it all so that you know if you're interested in something like this, which there will be a link down in the video description to the resellers that have this, which there are a lot now because I am so late to the review party. But we'll go ahead, we'll go through the specs, we'll talk about it a little bit more. So we've got really big motors on this, 2203.5, 2650 kV. This is the 6S version. It does come in a 4S version as well. It's got the Gemfan tri-blade, 3520 props. Runcam Phoenix 2 camera. Flight controller is the Mamba DJI F722 Mini MK2 or Mark II. And the ESC is the Mamba F40. It's a 40 amp ESC. Here in the back we have the Mamba TX500, which is a power switchable VTX up to 500 milliwatts. And the antenna for the VTX is the Mamba Ultra, and it is right-hand circular polarized. It does come with these side plates that just snap on and off. We've got these plastic sheaths to protect the motor wires if you were to bend a prop in a crash. Crash. That's pretty typical of Diatone products. You get a host of accessories. You get extra battery mats, extra strap. I had a little bit of antenna tube left over. We have extra screws and zip ties. We have our guides for our components in here, as well as a keychain down in there, just a little keychain. And then on the back side, these are pretty handy little leads that Diatone tends to include, to where they have a harness coming off the flight controller. So if you have an RXSR like I did, you can just plug in a lead like this, so that it's a no solder sort of connection. Also comes with a USB-C cable to connect to your flight controller. And in the props, these are the Hurricane 3520s, and it had these little bits inside that you could connect or use for T-style, but of course we didn't need those. Without a battery, it weighs 222 grams. The primary flight that you saw was on this G&B 550 milliamp 6S battery, which brings the weight to 330 grams. I also flew it on this full send 850 milliamp battery that is, again, 6S. And that brings the weight up to 364 grams. And the biggest of the batteries that I tried on it was this Tattoo 1050 6S battery. And that brings it up to a whopping 400 grams. I flew it on this G&B 720, but I didn't care for it. I felt there was enough battery sag with this particular quad that this wasn't really viable. But with that battery, it brings the weight to 324.5 grams. Bottom carbon fiber plate is 3mm thick, and it is a unibody. And the top plate is 2mm thick. So the flight that I had, that I was doing that dive, and then kind of at the base of the dive, it just blanked out with static, was on this full send battery. And the reason why that was my fault is I should have checked the connection to make sure it was real nice and solid. It was not. It was a little bit loose. And that is because we needed to spread out these the connectors in the XT60 a little bit. And one way you can do that, you can do it with the straight side, but I usually do it with the Phillips side, is to just get it inside here and just kind of wiggle it around. You see how it's spreading out down there a little bit? And that will tighten up the connector. If I had done that prior to my flights, then I probably wouldn't have suffered that particular crash. As you can see, the frame is nice and chamfered, and they do have some extras engraved into the frame, like we have the Roma here, and then up top we've got a little bit of color with the Diatone. Nice touches. I approve of those. The Diatone always uses these screws that, I don't know if they're better, but they sure are sharper to look at. How they have on this beveled edge, how it's chromed, and it's also then got the black on the other sides of it, so it kind of stands out. It gives it a little bit of a pop. I know that makes it more of a shelf queen sort of topic, but it's something that I always notice, even when I have a bunch of these screws just sitting in my my reserve of screws, which is funny. This is what I keep my excess screws in, as you can see there. And I can always identify Diatone screws, as you probably can as well, by their coloration that they use. Also here on the back, I didn't mention it, but we do have a TPU print that houses our VTX antenna as well as the XT60. And then if you were to get the Crossfire version or mount, excuse me, they all come without receivers. You have to get a receiver after the fact. You could mount your Crossfire down here. And I think, yeah, these turn out. So you probably have your antenna come out, and then you fish the bendy sides of the antenna in, and you work this together. I don't see too much of a bend in this area, and you do see that it has a metal backing up in there, so it is screwed into this TPU. You know, if you were to have a pretty terrible crash, maybe you come flying in under a garage door or barn door, and it catches on the backside if it misses the battery. There's potential that you could tear this all apart. You know, it's one of the many things that could be torn apart in our quads, but, you know, Most of us would chalk that up as just a bad luck sort of crash if you did tear your antenna off, but they did screw it down, so that's really the best you can do without having this mounted up into the carbon fiber. You know, oftentimes for years we used to zip tie our VTX kind of to the top plate and then have the antenna just pointed out, and that way if it did catch anything, it would pull the zip tie and then hopefully come loose before it pulled the wires off of the VTX. But that's the one complaint about this design that I could see most of us would identify possibly, and maybe it's not even a complaint. Of course, in my case, I used an RXSR, so I have my 2 antenna tubes poked out of that TPU mount there. It does have a buzzer. You can see that possibly right in there, and they've mounted that flat to the carbon fiber with a little bit of double-sided sticky tape. We do have this mount in here, and you saw a little bit of the mount in our flight. That's going to vary a little bit because you can, change your angle quite easily. This one does not have a slider, but you see the slot above it. It does have a slider. I think that's mainly mounted for the DJI cameras, but you could use that in a standard analog camera to bring your camera either out so you don't see the camera protection or the front end of the quad, or you can slide it back to get more camera protection. These should protect you in most cases. If you are flying a 400-gram quad and you go flush into a tree, I would expect these to bend. And if you hit hard enough, you might even get some sort of top plate breakage. But, that's a huge variable. It didn't happen to me. I've never had that happen. But I can see with a heavy quad that carries quite a bit of weight and speed that, these aren't, titanium, I don't think. I think these are going to bend. And if they hit right to where they bend up, you could end up with a breakage here in this area. But it is solid all the way across. We just have the holes and then a little bit of a recess cut out. So that top plate may hold in place. I'm just pointing that out as something that I saw, and I thought, Diatone has used these a number of times, and I don't necessarily have a problem with, but if you are going dead on and you go really fast, it has the potential of bending this and then pushing the top plate up and maybe snapping it right here along the screw holes. I'm really not certain of the other advantages flying a 3.5-inch quad with this size of motor might be. If you have ideas of your own of why Diatone chose this motor, I would like to see this model come out in a more traditional 3-inch prop with a more traditional 3-inch motor, anything from the 1400 series up to the 1600 series, and see how that flies. Maybe these motors are light enough because they aren't tall stator motors, they're just very wide, that these don't add that much more weight than any of the motors that I'm mentioning. I'm just curious about bringing it back down to see if just a motor swap and maybe bring it back down into that sub 250 gram category for those people who are looking for sub 250, because this is not, obviously. It's 220 dry, you add some battery, you're well over 250. This should be available, as I mentioned, all over the place, and I'll put links down in the video description if you want to check out the current pricing, or maybe if you're watching this way down the road, they may have changed something with the quad. That does happen in this industry quite a little bit after the fact. Components are kind of hard to get right now. Sometimes they swap things out because you just can't buy that particular chip or component anymore. So if you're interested, there'll be links down in the video description. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. Everybody loves a good crash, right? And thanks for watching.